Hello, it's the Great Canadian Bagel here, coming to you with the first overall Senate race forecast. So, this is different than how I'm doing the House. Because of the nature of Senate races, and they're much more about individual people, and they're, generally speaking, much larger. Obviously, some places like Wyoming, the congressional and Senate race are the same size, but most states have more than one Congress representative, so the Senate race is naturally bigger for most states. Because of that, and because of how important individual Senate candidates are, I'm doing each Senate race as an individual forecast, and if you are curious about the county breakdowns of all the races that I've covered, you can look at my Twitter. I have posted the maps there, and I can't really keep them posted here because, first off, there's really not much to say about most of these races because I personally do not have enough hours in my day to read up about all of the campaign details of every single Senate race. Even if I was doing this full time and was being paid for it, I don't have the time to do that and do model updates. Like, actually crunch the numbers. There's just too much. So we're going to do a generalized thing like this, and we're going to have individual maps with counties going to which candidate posted on Twitter, and I might, for some particular ones, like I did Arizona earlier, I did a full video on Arizona, I might do that for some races where it is more, it's closer, or it's more notorious, or it's higher profile. I might do it for one of those, like a full-on video. But overall, we're probably going to keep it this format. Other thing I'm going to say right off the bat, there's too many Senate races, and most of them have really bad polling available, so I'm not going to actually do a detailed model. Right now, we have Washington, Nevada, Arizona, Wisconsin, Georgia, North Carolina, Pennsylvania, and New Hampshire, all with detailed models that are a variant of how I'm handling the House. I won't get into too much the programming details of how they're different, but they're not different in kind, they're just different in... the algorithm's not different, it's just the implementation's different, but that's getting really in the weeds that I don't want to get into. Mostly for trade secrecy reasons. But, as you can see, there's more states than that are having Senate races, and I've marked all the ones in yellow that I'm running with this yellow dot, that I'm running a much simplified model, which I would frankly really describe more as napkin math plus insight of having done multiple election forecasts at this point. Many at this point, frankly. So, all the ones with the yellow dot have a much larger margin of error and a much lower confidence level. Now, you might argue this might be the same thing, but confidence level is less a statistical thing in the sense, and more of a me. I am less confident in them. The margin of errors are naturally higher, but I'm myself less confident in my categorization. All the ones that my models did, I am very confident are correct, barring bad polling or a bad assumption. Naturally, I don't know if the polling's bad or not, because the election hasn't happened, and I've not done Senate races before, and I definitely haven't done Senate races for these 8 different states that I'm forecasting. So, some of my assumptions on how I'm handling them might be wrong. But, if they function the way I think they're going to function, which is somewhat analogous to for lack of a better word, a presidential election in the state, that particular state that is, I think how I've handled them is the correct way to do it. or at least an adequate way to do it. Now, we still have the concern about data, and unfortunately, we don't have good data for all of the states. Like you might have noticed if you follow my Twitter at Bagel Polling, in case you're wondering, I didn't ever publish Wisconsin's map because the lack of party affiliation data specifically has caused my model, which I think the headline numbers are correct, because how I generate county forecasts and how I generate headline numbers are not the same. The headline number I am confident in, the county map I am not very confident in, because the current implementation, I am looking into methods. I've done some, for lack of better terms, I've done some back of the envelope math, tweaking how I'm handling Wisconsin specifically. It's effectively a result of how some of the counties that are typically vote Democrat in Wisconsin are also typically are fairly rural as well. At least they look rural on a first level approximation. And one possible solution there on my end is I go in more detailed and I hand categorize counties. Not a great solution. Or I do something higher level that will handle this better, which I'm currently looking into. I have some ideas, and I will note all the ideas I've tried so far and all the ideas I have will not change the headline number. It is changing how votes are being projected, not how many votes the candidate's getting, because that is a big difference here. So with those core things out of the way, let's just start discussing things, right? So obviously, anyone with eyes at this point will have noticed I am forecasting that the Republicans are going to be taking the Senate. Right now, I have them currently winning 3 seats, though there is some inklings in some recent polling that Oz might be catching up in Wisconsin or Pennsylvania. We will see how much that holds true, and if that does occur, then we would likely be seeing 54 seats in the Senate. But the other states that are in play, New Hampshire, Washington, and Colorado, and specifically talking for Republican pickups, have a large enough Democrat lead that it is extremely unlikely that the Republicans will do a pickup by November. There is a little bit of inklings in New Hampshire. Maybe it's trending towards Bullock, but there's not a lot of polls, and the polling quality's a bit questionable. So I'm a little doubtful on that. But overall, it is trending in the raw polling, generally speaking, towards the Republicans. Just today, when I reran the numbers, Blake Masters in Arizona has narrowly edged out Kelly. This is the closest race right now. Just to go briefly, in order of closeness, it is Arizona, then it's Georgia, then it's Wisconsin, then Nevada, and then New Hampshire, then Washington and North Carolina are about the same. Of the ones I have personally done detailed models for. I realize that this is written wrong. This should be margin of victory. Apologies. So, Masters is narrowly edging Arizona, but at this point, I don't actually think there's enough time for it to trend the other way. Because a lot of the things in Arizona that are really big ballot issues are not issues Kelly's strong with. The border, inflation, the economy, etc. are all the really big issues in Arizona, especially for independents and especially for GOP members, which are like 70% of Arizona or something like that. Those are the biggest issues, and Masters is perceived by voters as the better candidate on all those issues. So I suspect, even though Masters is just narrowly edging out now, he's likely going to increase his lead, barring some fancy October surprise or just a complete misstep on his part. But even with that, Kari Lake, the governor candidate in Arizona, is also doing quite well, so I suspect even if Masters runs a lame campaign for the rest of the election, Lake will probably carry him over the finish line regardless, because she's much more personally popular than Blake, or than Masters, I should say, and is pretty much at this point almost a certain win. The polling says it's a bit closer than the race probably is. The other one where there is actually, I think, still reasonable doubt is Georgia. There was a bunch of polls in early September where Walker was comfortably in the lead in the polling, and in the last bit of polls, it's been a bit more in the doubt. His lead has eroded a little bit. But with that said, Georgia typically votes Republican. Brian Kemp is running as a governor in the gubernatorial election at the same time, and Kemp is quite personally popular in Georgia. And similarly to how I think Kari Lake might bring Masters over the finish line regardless of Masters' qualities as a candidate, I think it's very likely that Kemp could very well bring Walker over the finish line regardless by turning out Republicans who might not be excited about Kemp himself. Walker himself, but they might like. But since Kemp is very popular, he might get those Republicans to come out to vote regardless. That makes sense. So, those are the two GOP flips that look in doubt. At this point, Nevada's all but certain. I don't think there's been... I'll just double check real quick live here, but I'm pretty sure all the recent polling has... Laxalt? Yeah, all the polling since August has had Laxalt. I don't know how to pronounce that name. I presume it's like Hispanic, but I'm gonna call him Laxalt. Laxalt has been leading in every single poll since September started, and his lead is pretty comfortable at this point. I don't really see that race changing. North Carolina was always kind of a meme that it was ever really in doubt. The last North Carolina GOP senator easily won in 2016. And North Carolina tends to edge GOP normally. And this is a really bad year for Democrats on, again, the core issues that matter in North Carolina. And I know, specifically for Senate races, people have talked about abortion being a big issue. And it's really not that big of a factor. Independents don't care about it. Republicans are, if anything, more likely to vote in favor of Republicans because they're actually doing something on restricting abortions. And sure, Democrats might be more willing to go out, but in the swings, I'm going to call them the swing states in this regard, the swing states for the Senate, the Democrats are not enough voters to actually matter in that. And the Democrat party affiliation conversion is, at this point, by polling, pretty much maxed out. Most polls are putting close to 96, 97% of registered Democrats voting Democrat in these Senate races. So, the only thing they can do at this point is get voters who wouldn't have voted to go out. But if they're not already willing to vote on October the 6th, when this is being released, they're likely not going to be turned out because of Roe being overturned, because of the Dobbs decision. If they were going to turn out as a result, that should already be reflected in the polling. So in all these states, Nevada, Georgia, Arizona specifically, the Democrats have pretty much hit their ceiling of registered Democrats voting Democrat. It's getting 100% of registered Democrats to vote Democrat is functionally impossible, because some people will register Democrat to vote Democrat even though they're not Democrat. It happens in all the parties. Some will register Democrat, then change their mind and not bother changing their affiliate, their registration, etc. Or some might just personally dislike the candidate and not want to vote for them. So the Democrats have pretty much hit their ceiling there, and I don't see anything that could happen in the next month that will increase the voting enthusiasm. I think their voting enthusiasm, if it hasn't already peaked, might be peaked. I don't see it going much more than it is right now. So in that regard, anyone suggesting Dobbs is a big deal isn't that. In this particular circumstance, isn't looking at the full picture, because independents don't care about the Dobbs decision. Republicans are happy about it, and likely got a very similar turnout / voter enthusiasm boost as well that the Democrats got. And independent voters care about inflation, the economy, education. They're starting to actually get really freaked out about, for lack of a better term, gender-affirming care, gender theory. We're going to go with gender theory. The education and gender theory are starting to become really big issues among independent voters, and those are losing issues for the Democrats. The independent voters, by polling, don't like those issues. Right? Don't like the Democrat positions on those issues. And you're starting to see action on state level in places like Oklahoma, Tennessee, I believe Florida too, on banning things like gender-affirming care, and there's a bunch of scandals popping up about hospitals providing surgeries to children to change their gender. So that's another losing issue for the Democrats. It's becoming even bigger in the news cycle. Illegal immigration and just high levels of immigration are also losing issues, which are also becoming more important, especially regards to the southern border, especially in places like Arizona, which is a competitive state, or which is a marginal race for the Senate. So it's very likely that a lot of these places, it's not going to change meaningfully. The places where it might change, the Senate races, we're looking at probably a little bit the Midwest here and more the Northeast. The reason why I say that is specifically in Pennsylvania. While I was skeptical earlier, Oz seems to be campaigning quite well, and there is starting to become really big doubts on, reflected by voters, in Fetterman's health and his ability to actually represent the people, as well as a lot of these positions I just outlined becoming more and more on the forefront in voters' minds, is also likely going to be hurting both Fetterman and Shapiro in Pennsylvania, because both of those people strongly support those issues. Gender theory, stuff like that, critical race theory. And those are, again, losing issues among independent voters. And generally speaking, how you win an election in the US is you get your party's people to turn out and you win the independents. I.e., if If you're the Democrats, you get the Democrat voters to actually vote, and you get independents to vote Democrat. So if the independents are souring on you on major issues, it's very difficult. The question is to what degree they will sour and how many of them will actually vote, because typically independents have the lowest turnout rates. But if that is the case, it is very possible, with a month left, that Pennsylvania could become more marginal. The polling is slowly trending that way for the Senate. It's not clear, and it might not be big enough to matter, but it is trending that way. Just, for example, Emerson College poll from August to the one on September, about a month later in Pennsylvania, went from Fetterman leading by 4 to Fetterman leading by 2. And this change isn't primarily that Oz is getting more voters. In fact, he technically lost a bit, but it's within margin of error, so it's not significant. It's Fetterman is losing support, and a lot of the support being lost is from independents, primarily. So it is very much the case here that the Republicans are pretty much set to pick up the Senate. The odds that they won't pick up the Senate are increasingly unlikely as polling continues to trend in their favor. And most of the seats they're defending, other than Pennsylvania, are seats that are not easy to flip. Yes, you could argue Wisconsin, for example, is typically a very marginal state federally, but typically speaking, Wisconsin votes to the right of the national average. In other words, it slightly leans Republican. And by that I mean if the national popular vote is 51-47, Wisconsin, it's close to 50-50. Very slightly leaning Republican. So if Wisconsin typically leans Republican very slightly, and Republicans are set to win the popular vote, it shouldn't be that surprising that they are set to win Wisconsin. The same thing is true in Ohio. I know there was a lot of media talk and a lot of noise about some polls in August, early September, that showed J.D. Vance potentially losing Ohio. That was nonsense. There's a reason why I didn't bother doing Ohio as a discrete model. Ohio flipping Democrat right now is silly. It's not going to happen. Trump carried the state by 8 points in 2020. So Trump, with a Trump-like candidate, a MAGA candidate on the ballot, Ohio was plus 11 Republican versus the national average. J.D. Vance is endorsed by Trump, and most people will describe him as a MAGA Republican who advocates for a lot of the same things Trump does. So why would a Trump-endorsed candidate in a state that overwhelmingly voted for Trump 2 years ago wildly change? No. It was bad polling. Ohio in 2020 was also forecast to be a very close state, possibly Democrat win, when Trump won it by 8. A lot of these times, and a lot of these cases, it's pretty consistent that some states' mainstream polling is really bad at polling. Is that intentional? Is that incompetence? Pick your poison. But it's pretty safe to say that some states, like Ohio, in the current environment, with the current Republican lead on the generic ballot, should, by all means, go Republican, and it shouldn't be really in any doubt. At least, not in any more doubt than, say, like Indiana. Yes, typically, Indiana has been more Republican than Ohio, but right now, with the insurgence of the MAGA wing, the American First wing, of the Republican Party, and the fact that, again, to emphasize this, J.D. Vance is from that wing, they're probably going to win Ohio. And again, this shouldn't be surprising. In a lot of these cases, these candidates, you shouldn't be surprised that they're winning. Media and pundits like to talk about how they're divisive, or they're too right-wing, or whatever. Insert your reason here. There's plenty of reasons they throw out. And that's just a whole load of hogwash. There's this whole bubble of political consultants and political pundits who have no idea what they're doing. Like, they're just completely incompetent. And I have data to back this up. There's been studies on expertise and things like elections and understanding politics. It's very hard to become an expert in this, because most people only focus on their national elections, and most people only focus on a few, so they don't have much experience in it. They don't have much attempts at it. And they oftentimes don't try to learn from mistakes. How you become an expert in something is you do it a lot, you compare it with real-world results, and you try to learn from your result, or your mistakes. Why did you do it wrong? That's why someone can become, say, an expert at chess. You can play chess a lot, and you can analyze every single time you lost why you lost. Which is part of the reason why I try to do as many elections as I have personal time for and enough knowledge of. Because the only way to become good at something like this, in my opinion, is you have to do it a lot. You have to do as many elections as possible in as short a time period as possible, and you have to learn from why you did it wrong. Not even just on the modeling side, but on the high-level understanding side. I will not claim I'm an expert at this. I will not even claim I'm the best. Or I would say I'm good. Because, of course I would say I'm good. Most people say they're good at things. They do. But I have a decent track record at this. And the idea, just to go back to the main thing, that a candidate who is strongly differentiated from his opponent is going to lose because of strong differentiation is just hot air. The America First candidates, the ones endorsed by Trump, etc., are not going to lose by virtue of being that. You don't win elections by being a carbon copy of the other guy. If you have two options, you have person A or person B. And there's three issues, 1, 2, and 3. If person A has a long track record and a lot of credibility on issue 1, and person B tries to co-opt issue 1 well, person B is probably going to have a bad time because people typically don't vote, or we'll understand this. To be a more concrete example, if the Republicans decided tomorrow to pivot to a pro-choice position, it wouldn't work. A Republican running on a pro-choice platform will not win because he's on a pro-choice platform, or she. It is possible that they might lose because of a pro-life platform, but that doesn't mean the contrapositive is true. Just because you might lose because of a pro-life platform, and by that I mean you're talking about restricting abortion or other pro-life causes, proactively doing something, I will say. Just because you might lose for proactively doing pro-life things doesn't mean you would win if that candidate decided to pretend to be pro-choice. Part of this is you have to own up to who you are, and you also have to understand and you have to realize your opposition, their core base, and yourself and your core base. People are not dumb. They will spot a phony, so they won't vote for the phony. So you don't want to be a phony. Okay, so step one. In step two, if the other person, the Democrat, is very credible as pro-choice, because they've always been that way, and they've always advocated that way, and they've always voted that way, you're not going to beat them on that issue. It won't be a winning issue for you. So if you keep the discussion and the debate about that issue, you won't win. However, if pro-life is the winning side there, then you're fine, and you should talk about it. And that's the big thing you see a lot of analysts and you see a lot of politicians make the mistake on. Their opponent will think they're really strong on an issue and will talk about it, and they will acquiesce and they will talk about it. In other words, Democrats talking about restricting, they think the pro-choice line or the abortion line is the way to go, so they talk about it endlessly, and the Republican acquiesces and only talks about it. Well, you're playing into their hands. You shouldn't be talking about the issues that they want to talk about. And that's why the idea that a MAGA Republican is going to lose because they're divisive, or pro-lifers are going to lose because they're divisive, is hogwash. They can lose because they're bad at campaigning. But right now, for example, let's pick, I don't know, Arizona. Kari Lake, endorsed by Trump, very strong pro-lifer. Typically, Arizona is considered a purple state. She's likely going to decisively win. Why is that? It's not because Kari Lake decided, when she wanted to run for governor, that she was going to moderate her position, become kind of vaguely center-right, and adopt pro-choice mantras and stuff like that. No, it's not because she did that. It's because she saw what issues voters cared about, either by talking to them or polling. I would always strongly recommend you talk to people, because polling doesn't capture why, and oftentimes pollsters can prompt responses with their questioning. And she adopted a platform that tackles those issues. Crime, border control, border being the really big one in Arizona, and the economy. She can't do too much on the economy because a lot of it is impacted by bad federal policies and bad central banking practices, but she can do a lot on, specifically, the border. So how does she win that election? She doesn't talk about things Katie Hobbs wants to talk about. She doesn't talk about abortion. She doesn't talk about other things. I'm not 100% certain every talking point Hobbs is making, but we'll just continue to use abortion because I know that one is being used. She doesn't talk about that. She talks about the border. She talks about crime. Or, as she has done occasionally, Kari Lake, she does the U-turn and puts the ball back into Hobbs Court by saying, my position's not very radical. She wants to have abortions all the way up to birth. Why did you talk to her about that? That is a valid strategy, and that could work. You need a bit of chutzpah, or grit, and a bit of charisma to actually pull that off. Lake has both grit and charisma in this regard. So, you know, it works for her. But I would not generally recommend that as the best strategy. It can work, and if it works, it's very effective, but it's a more difficult strategy, I will say. So, what does all this mean here, right? Like, focus hyper in on this. Well, it seems very unlikely. I will never do percentages because percentages are meaningless. It seems very unlikely that the Republicans could lose the Senate. Even if they get the worst outcome and they lose Arizona and they lose Georgia, Nevada looks like a shoo-in. And every other state looks like it should hold worst case scenario. So, even in the worst case scenario here, it should be a flip. But with that, worst case for the Republicans, I should say. But with that, I mean, if you liked the video, by all means, like, share, subscribe. If you see something that I might have done wrong or something that looks fishy, by all means, comment below. I do make mistakes, and as I said earlier, I cannot get better if I do not learn from my mistakes, which is why people who are in denial about their mistakes are silly. You're going to make mistakes. It's going to happen. Learn from them. So, you see any mistakes I might have made? By all means, shout it out. Could have made a mistake here. I did a lot of work today, so it's always possible. I will not put that out there, or past the possibility. And if you want to see stuff like this in the future, make sure you subscribe, and you can follow me on Twitter if you want to see state maps as I publish them, because I just kind of throw them out on Twitter whenever I have them done. Because again, I'm probably not going to do many specific state-level Senate race videos for lack of things to say and lack of time in the upload schedule before November. If I had things to say, I could make time for them, but I don't really have anything to say, so I'm not going to really make time for them. The only ones I really have things to say about are Pennsylvania and Arizona, because those are the two that get the most media attention that I see. I can't talk about things I don't see. And again, I'm one person, and I'm not doing this full time, and I'm also not being paid. So mistakes happen, and I can't cover everything. So with that, I bid you adieu. And on Sunday, and all Sundays going forward until the election day, up until the election day, I will be doing a House of Representatives update, and we will see how many Senate updates I do. It'll be more come as it goes, because the House of Representatives regularly gets 3 to 4 polls a week. It's not certain how many polls we get in the Senate races, and if the polls in the Senate races aren't meaningfully changing things, it might not be worth saying anything. But if stuff happens that is worth mentioning, I might make a video even if the forecast doesn't change. So stay tuned on that. I will try to let you know before I do Senate updates, but for now, it is what it is. And with that, once again, I bid you adieu.